On an otherwise unremarkable evening, 4 teenage girls made a decision that their families would not hear about until it was already too late. There were no warning signs that anyone thought to look for. No dramatic argument, no tearful goodbye. Just 4 ordinary young women, quietly crossing a threshold that, once crossed, could not be uncrossed. What drove them was not money. It was not ambition in the conventional sense. It was something far more powerful and far harder to explain to someone who has never felt it, the pull of an obsession so consuming that it begins to feel indistinguishable from necessity. Their destination? A BTS concert. Their method? Running away from home. Tonight, we are telling that story in full. Not to sensationalize it, and not to assign blame where none is due, but because this story raises questions about fandom, psychology, and the very real consequences that can follow when emotion overtakes reason. Questions that deserve honest, careful answers. To understand what these 4 girls did, you first have to understand where it all started, which was not, as many people might assume, with a single dramatic moment of obsession. It rarely is. For millions of young people around the world, BTS represents something that goes well beyond music. The group rose from relative obscurity in South Korea in 2013 to become one of the best-selling music acts in recorded history, accumulating a global fan base, known as ARMY, that is remarkable not just for its size, but for the depth of emotional investment its members bring to their devotion. Researchers who study fan culture have long noted that BTS's appeal is distinctively psychological. The group has built an unusually transparent public image, sharing their struggles with mental health, their personal fears, their creative frustrations, in a way that makes fans feel genuinely seen. It is a parasocial relationship at an unprecedented scale. And for teenagers navigating the particular pressures of that stage of life, it can become profoundly significant. For these 4 girls, the connection did not arrive all at once. It built slowly, the way most things that matter do. A song heard at the right moment. A video that articulated something they had never been able to put into words. A voice that, for reasons difficult to fully explain, felt like it understood them. School pressure. Family expectations. The quiet, ordinary loneliness of adolescence. All of it becomes more bearable when you have something to disappear into. And then, without fully noticing the shift, disappearing into it became something closer to living inside it. At what point does admiration become identity? It is a question that psychologists have been examining with increasing urgency as celebrity culture has moved from something people engaged with occasionally to something that saturates daily life through social media, streaming platforms, and algorithmically curated content. The term parasocial relationship was first coined in the 1950s by sociologists Donald Horton and Richard Wall, who observed that television audiences were developing one-sided emotional bonds with on-screen personalities, bonds that felt, to the viewer, like genuine friendship. Decades later, the phenomenon has not diminished. It has accelerated. What makes parasocial bonds so psychologically compelling is that the brain, in many ways, processes them the same way it processes real relationships. When you hear someone's voice every day, watch them laugh and cry and express vulnerability, your neural architecture does not automatically flag it as fictional closeness. It registers connection. It registers familiarity. And connection, to the human brain, is not a luxury, it is a fundamental need. For the 4 girls at the center of this story, that connection had deepened over months or years into something that felt, from the inside, entirely real. BTS was not a band they enjoyed. BTS was, in a meaningful psychological sense, part of their world. And when the possibility emerged, however unlikely, that they might be able to enter the same physical space as the people they had built this entire inner world around, the emotional pull was not something logic could simply override. Understanding this does not excuse the decision. But it does explain it. And explanation matters, especially if we want to prevent it from happening again. The plan, if you could call it that, almost certainly did not begin as one. It most likely started the way many consequential ideas do, as something half-joking. A comment made in a group chat or during a conversation that everyone immediately dismissed. Imagine if we just went. A laugh, a few seconds of genuine imagining, and then nothing. Except that it did not stay as nothing. There is a well-documented social phenomenon in which shared fantasy, once verbalized within a group, gains a kind of momentum it does not have when kept private. When one person says something impossible aloud and another person responds not with dismissal but with curiosity, what if it's not impossible? The impossible begins, subtly, to renegotiate its terms. The girls were not operating in isolation. They were reinforcing each other. Each expression of enthusiasm made the idea feel slightly more legitimate to the next person. Each logistical question that got answered, however loosely, made the plan feel slightly more real. Social psychologists call this group polarization. When like-minded individuals discuss a shared desire, they tend not to moderate each other. They tend to escalate. The most extreme position in the room gradually becomes the consensus position, because it is the one that feels most aligned with what everyone already wants to believe. By the time the decision was effectively made, it may have felt, to all four of them, like something that had arrived naturally. A conclusion everyone had reached together, rather than a line that any single person had chosen to cross. The night they left was, by most accounts, unremarkable in its quietness. This is something that often surprises people when they hear about incidents like this one. There is a cultural expectation that a decision of this magnitude should come with visible drama, a fight, a scene, some outward signal that something serious is happening. But the reality of impulsive teenage decision-making is frequently the opposite. They did not announce what they were doing. They did not leave detailed notes. They packed lightly and quickly, taking what money they had access to, which was not much, and they left. The reasoning, from a psychological standpoint, is not difficult to understand. To explain the plan to a parent or guardian would require saying it out loud, in full, to someone whose response would almost certainly be rational and immediate, no. An irrational no, in that moment, was something the plan could not survive. So the plan was kept from anyone capable of delivering one. They were not thinking about danger. They were not calculating risk. They were thinking about a concert. About a moment they had imagined so vividly that it had begun to feel more real than the life they were leaving behind, at least for that one night. That gap between imagination and reality is where most dangerous decisions are made. In the early hours of their journey, by all reasonable inference, they felt extraordinary. This, too, is a well-understood phenomenon. Researchers studying risk-taking behavior in adolescents consistently find that the initial phase of a transgressive act, the moment after the rule is broken and before the consequences arrive, is associated with a powerful dopamine response. The brain rewards the act of deciding, of committing, of moving. Everything would have felt sharper, more vivid. The conversations would have been animated, the laughter easier. The future, in that particular darkness, would have seemed full of possibility. They would have talked about what they planned to do when they arrived. Mapped out the concert in their minds. Rehearsed the moment they had spent so long imagining. The journey would have felt like the opening of something rather than the beginning of a mistake. This is what makes situations like this so difficult to address after the fact. From the inside, in those first hours, it does not feel like a mistake. It feels like the opposite. It feels like courage. Like the one time you actually did the thing everyone talks about doing and no one ever actually does. The problem is that reality operates on a longer timeline than euphoria. Reality, when it returned, did so in the way it typically does, not dramatically, but incrementally. The money started running out faster than anticipated. The logistics that had seemed manageable in theory revealed themselves as complicated in practice. The certainty that had felt solid began to develop small cracks, a missed connection, an unexpected obstacle, the dawning awareness that the gap between where they were and where they needed to be was larger than they had accounted for. And with that dawning awareness came something else. Fear is not always immediate in these situations. It tends to arrive only after the adrenaline has begun to thin, only after the brain has had enough time to process not just the excitement of the journey but its actual circumstances. 4 teenage girls. An unfamiliar environment. Limited resources. No adult supervision. No clear plan. The bravado that had sustained the first stage of the journey began to give way to something quieter and much harder to manage, the recognition that they were not, in fact, in a film. They were in real life. And in real life, things do not resolve neatly simply because you want them to. The concert that had felt so close, so almost touchable, was beginning to feel like what it had always actually been, something on the other side of an enormous distance. While the girls were navigating their unraveling plan, the situation at home had escalated quickly and severely. When 4 teenagers go missing, simultaneously, without explanation, it is not treated as a minor concern. It is treated as an emergency. Families were alerted. Authorities were contacted. The machinery of a missing person's response was set into motion. It is worth pausing here to consider what that experience is like for a parent. To return home and find your child gone. To have no knowledge of where they are, whether they are safe, or what has happened to them. To understand, in the abstract, that they are probably fine, and to be entirely unable to believe it, because abstraction offers very little comfort when your child is not where they should be. Every hour without information compounds the fear. Every unanswered call amplifies the worst possibilities. The search was not just logistical. It was, for the families involved, profoundly traumatic. And all of it was the direct result of a decision made, however sincerely, however emotionally, for a concert. They were found. All 4 of them. Physically unharmed. This outcome, it must be said, was not guaranteed. The conditions that surround situations like this one carry genuine risks, risks that the girls themselves were likely not fully equipped to assess at the time of their departure. But they were safe. And they were brought home. What happened when they arrived, however, was not simply relief. Relief was certainly part of it. But homecoming, in circumstances like these, is also a reckoning. There are conversations that cannot be delayed. Trust that has been broken in ways that do not immediately repair. A family system that has been shaken and will take time, sometimes a long time, to restabilize. And for the girls themselves, there was the particular difficulty of confronting, in the full light of reality, the distance between what they had imagined this experience would be and what it had actually become. They had not seen BTS. They had not reached their goal. What they had done, instead, was frighten the people who loved them, expose themselves to real danger, and discover, in the most visceral possible way, that emotional certainty is not the same thing as a plan. The immediate crisis ends when everyone is home safe. But the aftermath of an incident like this extends considerably further than its resolution. Broken trust between teenagers and their parents is not repaired by an apology or even by genuine remorse. It is rebuilt slowly, through consistency, through demonstrated change, through the difficult and unglamorous work of restoring a relationship that has been damaged. That process takes months. Sometimes longer. There is also the matter of how an event like this reshapes how other people, teachers, friends, extended family, perceive the individuals involved. This is not always fair. Adolescents are, by the nature of adolescence, people in the process of becoming. A single dramatic decision should not define them permanently. But it is honest to acknowledge that these events leave marks, and that those marks have to be contended with. Perhaps most significantly, there is the interior work of understanding what happened and why, which is, in many ways, the hardest part. Because it requires a degree of honest self-examination that is difficult at any age, and particularly difficult at a stage of life when identity is still being formed and the emotional landscape is inherently volatile. What does it mean that something felt so right and turned out to be so wrong? How do you hold those two things together? How do you move forward with that knowledge? These are not small questions. Let us be precise about something, because precision matters here. This story is not about BTS. The members of BTS did not ask for this to happen. They did not encourage it. They have, in fact, spoken publicly and repeatedly about the importance of their fans taking care of themselves, of not sacrificing their health or their well-being in service of their fandom. It would be fundamentally unfair to frame this as a consequence of who BTS is or what they represent. What this story is about is the gap between influence and responsibility, and more specifically, about what happens when the emotional intensity that any form of deep attachment can generate is not matched by an equivalent degree of self-awareness. The reach and the intimacy of parasocial bonds have expanded significantly in the social media era. Parasocial relationships are not new. But the infrastructure that sustains them, algorithmically curated content, direct-to-fan social media channels, behind-the-scenes access, has made them more immersive and more emotionally saturating than at any previous point in history. When the object of that attachment is someone who will never know your name, and the intensity of feeling that person generates begins to compete with the demands of real life, school, family, safety, something has gone wrong. Not with the music. Not with the artist. With the balance. There is nothing wrong with loving music deeply. There is nothing wrong with finding comfort in art, or with building a community around a shared passion. These are some of the more genuinely beautiful things that human beings do. But there is a version of that love that curls inward, that stops being about what the music gives you and starts being about filling a gap that the music was never designed to fill. A version that mistakes intensity of feeling for depth of connection. That confuses the vividness of imagination for the reliability of reality. And when that version takes hold, the line between enthusiasm and recklessness, between being a fan and being lost, can move without anyone noticing until it has already been crossed. 4 girls crossed that line. They were lucky enough to come back from it. Not everyone is. This is the kind of story that invites more than a reaction. It invites a conversation. Was this simply an extreme expression of fandom, something unusual, unlikely to be repeated? Or does it reflect something broader about the way we relate to the artists and celebrities who populate our emotional lives, and the ways in which that relationship can, under certain conditions, become something that requires more careful attention? We would genuinely like to hear your perspective in the comments. If stories like this one, stories that take the intersection of culture, psychology, and human behavior seriously, are something you want more of, consider subscribing to How You Talk. Every week, we go deeper than the headline. Because the most important stories are rarely the ones that look obvious from the outside.